The noon sun was merciless, a burning brand pressed against the earth until every stone and splinter of would seem to sweat. Dust curled up in lazy spirals, carried by a wind that smelled of sweat, horsehair, and the sour tang of tobacco spit. The townsfolk had gathered in the square, their shadows short and mean, eyes sharp as knives. They did not come for joy, but for spectacle, for the quiet thrill of watching misery sold cheap. On the makeshift platform, little more than a wagon bed with a rotting plank laid across it, stood two sisters. Their ankles were bare, red earth clinging to the skin like shame itself. Rope bound their wrists, chafing flesh already rubbed raw. The older one, Ayoka, stood still as a stone statue. 19, with black hair loose around her shoulders, she held her chin in defiance, though the weight of 100 eyes tried to bow her down. She had learned long ago that tears fed cruelty. Silence, even when it burned her throat, was her only shield. Beside her trembled Nayeli, barely 15. Her eyes, wide and frightened, caught every whisper, every sneer, every pebble a boy tossed that skittered across the platform. Her lips moved as though she prayed, though no sound carried to the crowd. The auctioneer was a fleshy man, his shirt straining over his belly, voice oily and loud. "Two fine ones here," he bellowed, slapping the plank with his boot heel. "Strong stock. Breed in age. Work the fields, warm a bed. Make your winters less lonesome." The crowd laughed, low, ugly. Words like savages and squaws hissed from their mouths, not spoken to the sisters but about them, as though they were already gone from their own bodies. Ayoka swallowed the bile rising in her throat. "Do not let them see you break," she told herself. "Not for their eyes. Not for their jeers." Nayeli swayed, her thin frame near buckling. Ayoka's shoulder brushed hers, barely a touch, but enough to anchor the girl for another breath. Bidding began. Numbers tossed into the air like stones. $5.
8.
12. Laughter, when the price of a mule was compared. From the edge of the crowd, a voice asked quietly, "What are they to you, then, that you sell them like cattle?" Heads turned. The man stood apart, not pushing forward like the rest. He wore no finery, only trail-worn boots and a coat dusted pale from the road. Caleb Rollins. His eyes, river gray, did not linger on the jeering mouths but fixed instead on the two sisters, steady, unflinching, as though seeing not bodies for sale but something the world had no right to touch. The auctioneer smirked. "Their property's stranger. Law says so. Care to make an offer?" The crowd chuckled, waiting for the man to shrink back. But Caleb stepped forward, his gait calm, shoulders broad from years behind a plow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out coins, silver that glinted sharp under the sun. He laid them in the auctioneer's sweaty hand, not with eagerness, but with a weary kind of finality. The crowd murmured. Some scoffed. "Man's spy in trouble." Others sneered. "Lonely fool." Ayoka's heart clenched. She braced herself for the grip of a stranger's hand on the rope, for the pull into another kind of cage. She imagined Nayeli crying out, and herself cutting her tongue on silence. But Caleb did not pull. Instead, he drew a knife from his belt, blade flashing once in the sun. With one clean stroke, he cut through the rope that bound their wrists. The hemp fibers snapped, curling loose to the dirt. The sisters froze. The auctioneer frowned, confused. "What are you?" But Caleb only slid the knife back into its sheath and looked at the girls. His voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the restless wind.
"Come," he said.
"I'll take you home." Not a command, not an order, just a plain offering, spoken like a man telling the truth. Ayoka stared at him, suspicion sharp as the blade he had just sheathed. Men's kindness was rarely free. She knew the world too well to believe otherwise. But something in his tone unsettled her, an absence of hunger, of cruelty. He looked at her as though he had no claim, only a door left open. Nayeli, trembling still, touched her wrist where the rope had burned. She looked at Ayoka with pleading eyes. The older sister's jaw tightened. Every instinct screamed to fight, to flee. But the crowd had already lost interest, turning back to gossip, laughter, and the next sorry soul up for sale. Here, in the crush of strangers, there was no escape. So, with the sun burning overhead and her throat dry as stone, Ayoka stepped off the wagon. Naeli followed, clutching her sister's sleeve. Caleb walked a pace ahead, not once reaching for them, not once looking back to see if they followed. The dust swallowed their footsteps. Behind them, the voices of the crowd faded, leaving only the creak of wagon wheels and the far cry of a hawk. And for the first time in many months, Ayoka felt the faintest tremor of something she had nearly forgotten. Not freedom, not yet, but the barest outline of possibility. The ranch lay beyond the hills, where wheat bent in the wind like prayers whispered low. By the time the sisters reached the cabin, the sky had cooled to a copper dusk, and the cicadas had begun their chorus. Caleb's place was not much, a lone house of pine boards, roof patched with tin, porch sagging with years. Yet it breathed a strange kind of quiet, a hush that felt neither cruel nor crowded, only waiting. Ayoka paused at the doorway. Naeli pressed to her side. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, leather, and the faint musk of a man who lived alone too long. Shadows stretched across the bare floorboards, interrupted only by a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a cold hearth. Caleb set down his hat on a peg, his voice rough from disuse. "You can rest here." He left the door wide, as if to prove he meant no cage. The sisters did not move at first. Naeli's eyes darted from wall to wall, as though expecting chains to spring from the shadows. Ayoka studied him, the set of his shoulders, the way his hands hung at his sides, not reaching, not demanding. Suspicion was still her armor, but some part of her noted the restraint. Caleb went to the hearth, struck flint, coaxed flame into the waiting wood. Soon smoke curled upward, softening the room's edges. He set a pot of beans over the fire, laid cornbread on the skillet. The smell filled the cabin, warmth carried on hunger's wind. When the food was ready, he placed the pot on the table and stepped back. "Eat," he said simply. He did not sit. He leaned against the doorframe instead, arms crossed, gaze lowered, giving them space as though they were wild deer that might scatter at the wrong move. Naeli, too hungry to resist, sat quickly, scooping beans with her fingers, eating fast as if the meal might vanish. Ayoka sat slower, eyes never leaving Caleb. She lifted the bread, tasted it cautiously, half expecting the sting of betrayal. But it was only bread, plain, warm, and strangely tender. Outside, night thickened. Coyotes sang in the distance, their cries lonesome and sharp. The little fire in the hearth crackled, the only other voice in the room. When the meal was done, Caleb cleared the dishes without a word. He brought 2 folded quilts from a chest and placed them on the floor near the hearth. Then he walked to the door, pausing only to murmur, "I'll be on the porch." He left them the cabin and lay down outside with only the night sky for a roof. Ayoka lay awake long after Naeli had drifted into sleep, listening. The boards creaked now and then with Caleb's shifting weight, but no door opened, no hand reached. That silence carried more meaning than words ever could. Morning came with pale light spilling through the cracks. The sisters found Caleb already in the yard, mending the fence. His shirt sleeves were rolled, forearms browned by sun, movement steady. He didn't look up when they stepped outside, only nodded once as if to say, "You are seen, but you are not owed." Later that day, he brought an old pair of moccasins to the porch, worn but serviceable. Naeli's own shoes were falling apart, soles nearly gone. Caleb sat cross-legged, leather and thread in his hands. Naeli hesitated, then crept closer. He did not speak, just worked slowly, stitching, smoothing, repairing. Ayoka watched from the doorway, arms folded. She told herself it was nothing, just another gesture from a man hiding some unspoken price. And yet, she could not ignore the gentleness in the way he returned the shoes, set them at Naeli's feet, and went back to his chores without expecting thanks. But the world beyond the ranch did not stay quiet. By the 3rd week, whispers from town reached their ears. Caleb had gone for supplies, and when he returned, his silence was heavier than before. Ayoka, ever watchful, pressed him. "What do they say?" He hesitated. His voice was rough when it came. "They say a man shouldn't keep Indian girls under his roof." The word keep cut her like a blade. She turned away, shame burning her throat though she had done nothing wrong. That evening, a preacher came, Preacher Collins, stiff-backed, his collar white as bone. He spoke on the porch, voice sharp with righteousness. "Caleb Rollins, you invite sin upon yourself. Cast them out. Better shame in town than damnation eternal." Ayoka overheard from inside, nails digging crescents into her palms. She waited for Caleb to agree, to choose the safety of reputation over them. But when Collins left, muttering fire and brimstone, Caleb only sat on the steps, face shadowed, hands clasped. He did not send them away. Something inside Ayoka trembled, not with fear this time, but with a dangerous flicker of respect. Days stretched on, slow as honey. The rhythms of the ranch became shared. Nayeli fed chickens, humming under her breath. Ayoka split kindling, her arms growing strong beneath the weight of the axe. Caleb worked alongside them, saying little, but each gesture, passing a tool, steadying a bucket, pouring water, wove invisible threads between them. One evening, Nayeli sat on the porch, hair tangled from the wind. She tried to braid it, fingers clumsy. Caleb, passing by, crouched down and took the strands gently. Without a word, he finished the braid, his hands careful, almost reverent. Nayeli beamed, soft laughter escaping her lips. Ayoka saw from the window. Her heart twisted, confused, suspicion battling with a longing she dared not name. Later, while chopping wood, the axe slipped, grazing her palm. She hissed, ready to curse herself, but Caleb's hand closed around her wrist, steadying it. His grip was firm but not harsh, his eyes holding hers for a long moment. Neither spoke. But in that silence, something shifted, unspoken, undeniable. Then came the storm. It swept across the plains without warning, a wall of wind and rain that hammered the cabin like fists. Shutters banged, thunder split the sky. Inside, the sisters huddled by the hearth, firelight trembling across their faces. Caleb barred the door, then sat nearby, silent, watching over them. The three of them stayed that way through the night, the world outside a chaos of lightning and fury, the world inside a fragile island of warmth. And though no words were spoken, Ayoka felt it, like a sprout pushing through cracked soil. Trust small and trembling, but alive. The days that followed the storm were quiet, the land washed clean and glistening beneath the sun. Wheat glimmered like a sea of gold, the creek ran louder with fresh rain, and for a time, it seemed peace had finally laid its hand over the ranch. But peace on the frontier was a fragile thing, a glass set too close to the edge of the table. It began with hoofbeats in the night. Ayoka woke first, light sleeper, always braced for danger. The sound was heavy, careless, carrying the smell of whiskey and the creak of saddles. She rose, knife hidden in her skirt, and moved to the window. Lanterns bobbed on the trail. 3, maybe 4 riders. Her breath caught. Nayeli stirred beside her, frightened eyes wide. Ayoka pressed a finger to her lips. Quiet. The horses stopped outside the fence. Men laughed, the sound mean and loose. Then came the voice of Harlan Pike, a ranch hand known in town for his temper and his thirst. "Rollins, we heard you're keepin' red girls in there. We figured maybe you're done with 'em and we'll take our turn." Nayeli shivered. Ayoka gripped her knife, so tight her knuckles ached. The door opened. Caleb stepped into the moonlight, rifle in hand. He did not shout. He did not bluster. His voice was steady as stone. "You'll leave my land." The men laughed harder. Jed Barker spat tobacco juice in the dirt. "Don't play righteous, Rollins. They ain't wives. They ain't women, not proper ones. Just cattle dressed as girls." Ayoka felt the words pierce her chest like barbs. Shame surged, hot and raw. But then, Caleb's voice again, firm, low, unshaken. They're under my roof. That makes them mine to protect. You want them? You'll have to come through me. He lifted the rifle. The moon caught the barrel's gleam. His hand did not tremble. The night stretched thin, silence drawn taut as a bowstring. For a moment, Ayoka feared blood would spill into the dust. But perhaps it was the calm in Caleb's eyes, or the knowledge that a man willing to fight with such quiet conviction would not stop at warning. One by one, the riders cursed, spat, and turned their horses. Lanterns bobbed away into the dark, swallowed by distance. When the last echo of hoofbeats died, Caleb lowered the rifle and came back inside. He said nothing, only set the weapon by the door and sat, head bowed, as though the weight of the world pressed on him. Ayoka looked at him then, not as a stranger, not as the man who had bought her freedom, but as someone who had staked his own life on her dignity. Her knife slipped from her hand, falling soundless to the floorboards. For the first time, she let herself believe they were safe. The days that followed changed in small, tender ways. Nayeli sang while feeding the chickens, voice steady now, not the trembling whisper of before. Caleb would pause his work to listen, his hat in his hands, as if the song itself was sacred. Ayoka found herself side by side with him more often, mending fences, carrying water, chopping wood. At first, silence stretched between them like a gulf. But slowly, that silence became companionable, carrying a language of glances, of hands brushing when passing tools, of breaths shared while lifting the same burden. One morning, as dawn painted the sky in strokes of rose and gold, Ayoka caught herself smiling, unguarded, fleeting, but real. She quickly looked away, ashamed of the warmth curling inside her chest. Yet the warmth lingered. The true turning point came not on the ranch, but in town. Caleb harnessed the wagon one afternoon and told the sisters they must come with him. Ayoka's suspicion rose again. Was this the moment he would hand them back, sell them to quiet the town's gossip? But Nayeli trusted, and so Ayoka followed, though her heart pounded. The townsfolk watched as the wagon rolled in, whispers darting like snakes. There they are. Shameful. He'll pay for this. Caleb ignored them. He walked straight into the clerk's office, silver coins clinking heavy on the counter. I want papers drawn. These girls, Ayoka and Nayeli, they're free. No man can claim them again. The clerk blinked, startled. That's a waste of good money, Rollins. They ain't. Caleb's voice cut through. They're people. Write the papers. Reluctant, the clerk dipped his quill, ink scratching against parchment. When he handed the documents across the desk, the names were there, black and certain. Ayoka. Nayeli. Not cattle. Not stock. Not shame. But themselves. Ayoka stared at the papers, breath caught in her throat. She touched her name, fingertips trembling, as if afraid it might vanish. Then she looked at Caleb. For the first time, her suspicion cracked. She saw not a man hiding a price, but a man who had given them back what the world had stolen. Freedom.
Dignity.
Belonging. Back at the ranch that night, the air smelled of rain and bread. Caleb baked for the first time since they'd arrived, the cornbread uneven but golden. Nayeli laughed when he burned his fingers and tried to hide it. Ayoka surprised herself by laughing too, the sound rusty and used. They ate together at the small wooden table, not master and servants, not savior and saved, but something gentler, something unnamed. Nayeli braided wildflowers into Caleb's hat, crowning him with petals. He let her, smiling faintly. Ayoka watched, her chest tightening. She knew the world outside still scorned them. She knew storms, both of weather and of men, would return. But in that moment, the cabin was warm, the hearth alive, and she allowed herself to believe in a word she had nearly forgotten. Home. Final reflection, to the reader. If you have listened this far, friend, remember, it is not the loud thunder that saves a soul, nor the sharpness of a gun. It is the quiet choices, the unspoken mercies, the hand that steadies instead of strikes. Out here, the world strips a person bare, sells them for less than cattle. But dignity can be returned, not with gold, but with gentleness. And sometimes, the loneliest man and the most broken souls find each other, and from that collision of pain comes a family, fragile yet unbreakable. Carry that with you, wherever your road runs, because mercy, once given, has the power to make a home out of dust.